Today we recap the latest news involving Oliver Askew and Felix Rosenqvist for 2021. Alex Albon, what's his future looking like? And is he another driver victim of Max Verstappen? And who is Colleague? Who is Max Colleague? And what's Colleague Racing up to now? All that and more on Grid Tonight. Hello everyone, welcome to Grid Tonight, your weekly news program for everything motorsports. Joe Samaniego here, as well as Kobe Lambeth from the Podium Finish. Definitely got an exciting show for you. We'll definitely start with some of the latest going on from IndyCar involving Oliver Askew and Felix Rosenqvist.
On Monday, silly season in the NTT IndyCar Series took a surprise turn. Oliver Askew will not be back with Arrow McLaren SP in 2021. However, the team announced that Pato O'Ward would return to the team. And on Tuesday evening, Motorsport.com first reported that Felix Rosenqvist is leaving Chip Ganassi Racing for Arrow McLaren SP to replace Oliver Askew. And this was definitely a huge bombshell, a move that not a lot of people saw coming. Joe, how surprised were you?
I was very surprised when this news came out. It was something out of the blue. And I think that I share the same common reaction a lot of folks online shared as well. And that was the shock. And then all of a sudden, just the wondering, could this have anything to do with his injury? Could this have anything to do with missing out? So definitely it was just a surprise. And then, of course, just like so many other people, especially folks in social media sharing their concerns about why did this happen?
Yeah, it was definitely caught me off guard. It was one of those like straight out of left field type of announcements that Oliver Askew has been released, and it's really crazy that this happened because I know on our previous Grid Tonight's program we talked about drivers and injuries and drivers having a history of hiding their injuries until things get worse, until you can no longer hide your injuries because we mentioned how drivers when they have to be out for a while, then you see another driver come in and take their place. That driver in the back of their mind, they don't really obviously don't want to see somebody else driving their car. But the worst fear is that the replacement driver goes out there and outperforms you in your own car, and then you're wondering, is that going to cause you to lose your seat? Yeah, and definitely this news left many wondering if there's a potential connection between Oliver's release from Arrow McLaren SP and his injury. And as we all know, Oliver Askew suffered a frightening, very hard crash at the Indy 500, and then a month later he reported having some balance and coordinating issues. Do you think there's a valid argument that Oliver Askew's release from McLaren may not have occurred if he was healthy?
I would say there's definitely a case someone can make that if he was still healthy, didn't have any of these issues, things might be a bit different. From the statements, there was no really clear indication as to why he was being released. And of course, there's been nothing essentially released anywhere that shows that there was a definite reason of this is the cause for being released or this is not the cause for being released. So everyone, trying to connect the dots, thinking there might be more to the story, and especially the concern about his health condition. I think those are all valid points people are bringing it up and valid concerns going forward.
Yeah, I do think that there's a valid argument that this probably would not have happened because after the crash, we all thought everybody was shocked to see Oliver crash that hard at that angle, and and it was and people were actually really obviously relieved to see him climb out of the car. And in those next few rounds, we thought Oliver was okay, but we did notice quite a drop off in his performance, and so it really does show that something was obviously wrong there because Askew was doing a really fine job, close to Pato O'Ward in performance before the crash, and then things really ch- took a turn for the worse after that Indy 500 crash. It just really seemed like the Oliver Askew did not have the same form, and obviously on behalf of everybody here at the Grid Network, we're hoping that Oliver is doing well with his recovery and that he'll be able to get one last race in with the Arrow McLaren team at the season finale of Firestone Grand Prix on the streets of St. Pete. And while many are trying to connect the dots, another argument made is that this is just the nature of racing. Arrow McLaren SP did let go of James Hinchcliffe in a controversial way after the 2019 season, but because I believe of a photo shoot that he didn't get approval of, so they cut him loose. And also, after one season, Marcus Ericsson was also replaced, making room for both Oliver Askew and Pato Award. Is McLaren been extremely serious about winning to the point they are willing to go for a better driver for their program, even if it appears unorthodox? Their tactics really seem to be rubbing some folks the wrong way.
It does appear to be really rubbing folks the wrong way, especially this case. And I know the experience that we saw what happened with James Hinchcliffe being let go after the ESPN body shoot. That was something where a lot of people saw James Hinchcliffe, a very popular driver amongst fans, to the point where it seemed like his release was really a bad deal, especially the thought that he would be some ambassador at the track but not racing. These are race car drivers. That is the last thing any race car driver will want to do is be at a racetrack, see the car that they used to drive out there with somebody else, and them just sitting in a almost like a hospitality, entertain the important sponsors. As with Marcus Ericsson, being with the team last year, not being with the team, he landed all right with Ganassi. It seems, especially with McLaren, they're starting to rub people a little bit the wrong way when it comes to these practices. And especially with Oliver Askew's case now, where a lot of people know he had been hurt after the Indianapolis 500 crash. You know, the statement that we take our employees' health, and we're glad he brought this up months ago when he announced he wasn't able to drive. And then all of a sudden, this to, oh, we're not going to be working together next year. He has a lot of potential. We wish him the best. Why would somebody say he has a lot of potential, but we're just going to let them go? They could go to another team and essentially beat you. So there's a lot of questions up there. And I think it's justifiable that some folks are really, really concerned, and even to the point upset with the way Arrow McLaren has been dealing with all the drivers.
And one interesting point that I wanted to make is that when you look at Oliver Askew and James Hinchcliffe, two drivers, two bizarre endings to their tenure at this specific team, Askew and Hinchcliffe are both clients of Spire. I'm sure a lot of NASCAR fans out there are familiar with Spire Motorsports that competes in the NASCAR Cup Series. They also have they also have agency, Spire Agency. So I do find it really interesting that Spire manages both of these drivers' careers, and then had two controversial endings as a client of Spire. And we'll definitely talk more about this topic later in the program, discussing if this puts drivers around motorsports in a bad spot when dealing with serious injuries.
Dealing with serious injuries, and of course, this could have ramifications not only in IndyCars, but throughout all of motorsports as well, including with one of the things with our next story, of course, Marc Marquez over in MotoGP, another driver recovering from a serious injury earlier this year. Of course, Marc Marquez, the defending champion for MotoGP and the grid ranking, has been out of competition ever since the opening round at Jerez when he had a frightening crash that essentially broke his arm. Attempted to come back early, but was unable to. Did a practice session, but the injury started coming. And then, of course, he had to get another surgery after re injuring himself. It was announced he will not attempt to race at the Aragon Grand Prix this upcoming weekend. There was hopes he could enter that race and he would still be mathematically eligible for the championship. However, without this race, he will not be mathematically eligible for the championship. And of course, he would need everyone to have a lot of bad luck. We've seen this year MotoGP. Nobody has really had that consistency to dominate, take the championship. Anything could have happened, but definitely won't be Marc Marquez win that championship. We only have 5 races left in 2020. Do you think we're going to see Marc Marquez return back in 2020?
In my honest opinion, I don't think it's in I don't think it's in his best interest to race again this season with the long off season and all of the time that he's missed. I think the best thing for Marc Marquez going forward is to just shut it down for the rest of the season. I mean, look, he's mathematically eliminated from winning the championship, so that's really nothing for him to gain. I think if he wants to come back next year and try to get back to the Marc Marquez of old, I think it's certainly in his best interest to just sit out the rest of the season and don't even try to attempt to come back this year.
Seems to be the case where the championship's out of grab. Yes, wins will be great, gain that experience, but especially with only 5 races left, of course, he's going to miss this one, so that'll reduce it down to 4. Might be the best interest, as you said, just come back. And especially, if you come back next year, you can just focus on the new bike, getting that ready. The other thing, of course, it might be playing into his mind about maybe I should come back now. What if we still have this pandemic situation and with the pandemic, limited time preparing for next year? It's going to be really interesting to see what he does. Now, of course, Marquez has missed every race since the Jerez, the opening round, was unable to come back for the second round due to his injuries. Honda has said his seat is for him and is waiting for his return. Now, compared to what happened to Askew, is Honda moving something we want to see teams like Arrow McLaren do, where the seat is staying open for that driver to return? Or is this a different situation, especially since Mark Marquez, highly successful, championships, wins, whereas with Oliver Askew was a rookie in his position?
Well, I certainly think the situations are different because Mark Marquez has the credentials to show that he's one of the best in MotoGP. And unfortunately for Oliver Askew, just been a rookie, he doesn't have those credentials yet. Yes, on the road to Indy ladder system, Oliver Askew certainly looks like one of the future stars of IndyCar, and he's definitely shown some flashes of brilliance this year on the track with Arrow McLaren SP. But with Mark Marquez, like I mentioned, he has all of those credentials to prove that he's a high caliber rider. And Oliver Askew, he certainly has the potential to be a great IndyCar driver long term. But not even one full season under his belt yet. Is really hard, to justify those credentials for Askew yet because the jury's still out on him.
Very hard to justify. I know one thing I think a lot of people are caught by surprise is to just see a rookie just come in and then have their seat at the end of the year be announced is no longer be their seat. A lot of times with rookies, we see 2-3 year plans. Of course, Mark Marquez, he isn't a rookie, two-time grid ranking world champion, multiple MotoGP championships. This year, of course, without him there, we haven't seen anybody really dominate the MotoGP season. Fabio Quartararo, the only driver to have multiple wins, 3 race wins this year. Of course, 2 at the beginning of the season, back-to-back race weekends at Jerez, and then 2 races ago. Still doesn't show that consistency and has a 10-point lead in MotoGP. When it comes to 2021, should we expect that Mark Marquez is going to be the driver to beat and come out winning?
Well, I'm not gonna commit to Mark Marquez 100% banning Mark Marquez all because we've seen several times when drivers or riders in this case when they get injured, sometimes they'll return stronger than ever. We saw after Kyle Busch had that bad crash in the Xfinity race and I believe broke his leg and ankle. We didn't know what Kyle Busch was going to be like when he come back, and I think after suffering that injury at Daytona, Kyle Busch in NASCAR, he turned out to be a lot better than he was before that. And the same thing could happen with Mark Marquez, or in other cases, we see them get involved in a really bad crash and break some bones or whatever, and they're not the same. I certainly think that Mark Marquez will be competitive, but I really do believe that he should sit out the rest of 2020 so he can have some extra months to heal. And I believe that a 100% healthy Mark Marquez he'll go back to dominating on the MotoGP circuit.
Yeah, he's definitely going to be one of the drivers everyone's going to be looking at, especially dominating. I know, thinking about what one of our partners in Grid Life, Jessica from the Paddock Insight, has said, even though he's not racing, he was still playing mind games, especially with Fabio Quartararo, saying, oh, he expected more from him, but he's not living up. Of course, we all know Fabio's going to be with Yamaha next year. That's going to be essentially Mark Marquez's big rival next year in MotoGP. MotoGP, of course, they got the Aragon Grand Prix coming up this weekend. We'll be talking more about that race as well as the other races, including the Bathurst 1000 on Grid Life this weekend. But definitely one of the big things we're going to be talking about as well right now is one of the NASCAR teams up and coming.
Yeah, definitely. It looks like we may have a new full-time NASCAR Cup team in 2022, and reports surfaced that Xfinity team Colic Racing is eyeing the possibility of moving up to the NASCAR Cup Series sometime in the near future, as soon as 2022, when the next gen car arrives. And Matt Colic, the owner, who entered the sport in 2016, has seen his team grow and provide big results in the Xfinity Series. And yeah, right now running 2 full-time cars with Justin Haley and Ross Chastain. and also a part-time car with AJ Allmendinger. And a little bit about Matt Collick. He's the founder of Leaf Filter, and if you remember the early days of Collick racing, Blake Cook ran the number 11 Leaf Filter car full time, which helped Matt Collick finally, build the foundation to start his career as a team owner. And with Matt Collick being a businessman, he's staying very busy with his company and his race team. Is Colleague Racing setting a good foundation in the Xfinity series to take things to the next level at Cup? I know really crazy how they went from a single car team with Blake Cook, and then when they let go of Blake Cook, had Justin Haley, and now they have Ross Chastain, AJ Allmendinger, and Colleague did mention that next year they'd like to run 3 full-time Xfinity cars and 1 part-time Xfinity car, and they also ran the Daytona 500 earlier this year with Justin Haley.
Yeah, it's definitely something seeing this team come from one car, one full season to what it is now. I know a lot of folks, especially on Twitter, social media, we see them as the DEI on the restrictor plates in the Xfinity series. Of course, for fans that aren't familiar, DEI from the early 2000s just dominated Talladega, Daytona. They were unbeatable. This year, they're looking really good. They got the super speedway program done. Is the Xfinity Series a great base to build up? Of course it is. It's a really, I think, a best bet for anybody that's thinking they want to own a team in the Sprint Cup Series. Get your start in the Xfinity Series. Get your start in the Truck Series, a smaller series, less cost. Of course, NASCAR, they have introduced all sorts of measures to try to keep costs down, especially in the lower series. And I think this is really becoming to the point where Matt Colleague feels confident that, okay, we're doing what we can here. We can compete in the Cup Series and get even more exposure for the team, our sponsors, our partners, and contend for a championship.
And compared the Winston Cup era to now, NASCAR has the charter system in place now with the race team alliance RTA, and they have 36 charters, and you need to be able to buy at least one of those charters for you to be locked into every race. So it's a lot different in the past where they just did the top 35 in owners points would be locked into every race, and if you fell out of the top 35, then you had to try to race your way in on speed. But as long as you have a charter now, one of the top 36 charter teams, then you're good to go. So if Colleague Racing wants to field a competitive full-time NASCAR Cup Series program in 2022, they're going to need to find a way to secure a charter. And we also have the engine alliances with TRD and Joe Gibbs Racing. Then now the Chevrolet deal with RCR and Hendrick Motors working together, and also Ford with Ralph Shates engines. Is NASCAR now starting to turn the page and be seen as a sensible venture?
Yes. Compared to the era where we saw, especially in the Winston Cup era, where a lot of times there was no guarantee. It was just, okay, you show up to a track with your team. Good luck. You need to try to qualify high enough and not get knocked out by a professional holder. The engine building costs, there weren't that many alliances back then. We started seeing some alliances in the early 2000s, but really, compared to now, it was just such a big task for anybody to come in and start a racing team. Now you could just make an agreement with a technical alliance, from the chassis to the engines to the car bodies. I mean, we see some teams, they lease out pit crews as well. So it is becoming more of a sensible venture idea to, hey, I want to get into car racing. And it's not only just in NASCAR we're seeing this also in Indy cars as well, other forms, because especially we don't have the record crowds, the record TV audience like we used to, especially when NASCAR was really booming the late 90s, early 2000s. So as that prize money and everything start to settle down, come down a bit, it's really good on NASCAR and other series to cut costs, look at ways to save teams money, because at the end, the teams are healthy, and this seems like a sensible venture for team owners to come in and invest. You're going to have more teams and more competition, and that will produce better racing out there on the track.
Yeah, and here's a little interesting story about Matt Collick. He actually didn't get his start in the sport as is just the owner. He got started off as a sponsor in 2015, and on Kelly Crandall from Racer.com's podcast, Colleague described his venture from sponsorship to team ownership, and surprisingly, it was not self-funding the team. Sponsorship from the companies funded it, and Matt said teams are making money to sponsor the vehicles. Is this the business model that NASCAR wanted? And an owner from Cleveland, businessman, got in NASCAR and he's been successful, fielding a competitive Xfinity program and encouraging more teams to join the sport.
Yes, NASCAR, if they see, especially if College Racing comes to the Cup Series and they're winning races and they're competitive, this is almost a golden example of this is why you want to enter NASCAR. Colleague, being from Ohio, as he said in that program, one phone call to sponsor a race car. He believed it was a 32 car. A lot of fun. They brought some staff, employees down. They had a great time, and that's what got them hooked. Then the one car in the Xfinity Series. It's been growing. The other thing he knows too, he owns that company. They were saying, hey, we're getting a big growth in NASCAR country, the Southeast. We want to market there. This is advertisement through NASCAR. So it definitely is a case of seeing somebody from outside the Southeast, outside the demographic of this is NASCAR country, getting hooked into the sport, seeing the business advantages for his business, and now running a team and not self-funded. This is something where NASCAR is to say, hey, if you want to get into sports management, owning a team, consider stock car racing. We all think about, I know there's a lot of video games out there like Football Manager, where you own a professional sports team. NASCAR, they want more owners, especially for the health of the sport. One of the big things, I think, with NASCAR, with the charter system and everything they got going right now, it's becoming more and more ideal, and especially with 2022, the regulations coming up to enter NASCAR, especially if you're brand new to the sport.
And actually, I think Colleague Racing has done it perfectly. Started off as a single car operation, built up their program over the years. I remember the very first season when Colleague Racing entered the NASCAR Xfinity Series. They were more so like competed mid pack, and then they slowly got closer to the front. Remember that Cinderella playoff run that Blake Cook went on? It was one of the more incredible stories during that year. And then Colleague Racing has become one of the main contenders in the NASCAR Xfinity Series with Justin Haley and Ross Chastain, and their part-time car number 16, AJ Allmendinger, won a few days ago at the Charlotte Roval. So Colleague Racing is definitely building one competitive organization and also getting their foot in the door with the Cup Series this year, running a Daytona 500 with Justin Haley. I think Colleague Racing, instead of like some teams, they just form and just enter the Cup Series, and then they run around in the back and struggle a little bit. I think Matt Colleague's approach was really smart. Go to the Xfinity Series and slowly build up over the years, and then become a very competitive Xfinity organization. Also, got to mention that RCR Alliance is really key as well. And Colleague Racing actually located on campus of Virtue Children's Racing. Yeah, so they have the alliance in place, and also with the manufacturer Chevrolet. That's good as well. And with Hendrick and RCR working together with our motor program, that's really going to push Colleague forward. And hopefully, when 2022 rolls around and with the next gen car, Colleague Racing, if they do decide to enter the Cup Series full time, then maybe, just maybe, Colleague Racing will be competitive right from the start, instead of just trying to finish in the top 30 struggling like we see some new teams in the Cup Series. And it's really great to see this business model starting to take a turn in a positive direction, because it's been a while since we've seen like a larger number of new teams enter the Cup Series. The next year we're going to have Denny Hamlin, Michael Jordan fielding that team for Bubba Wallace, and also have Trackhouse Racing team. Justin Marks going to be fielding the entry with Daniel Suarez and an RCR Alliance. So it's really exciting times for the NASCAR Cup Series, looking ahead to the future.
Very exciting times. I know, especially it's really interesting to see how we had the era of the big super teams come up. Now we're starting to see some of these single teams coming up, and with alliances for chassis, engines, even pit crews. It's going to be a really interesting to see, especially 2022, how NASCAR looks very different compared to 1996, 1998. I think it's going to be really interesting to follow. Going back to one of our stories, of course, Oliver Askew. It was on July 29th on Grid Tonight. We report on the procedure after a serious accident occurs on the racetrack. One of them, of course, was IndyCar's protocol following a concussion when a driver sustains from an accident. Unfortunately, on August 23rd at the Indianapolis 500, Oliver Askew had that big hit with the inside wall exiting turn 4. It was on September 24th, Oliver announced that he will be missing the Harvest Grand Prix after the balance and coordination issues. And then it was on the following Grid Tonight in October, we reported and discussed on how it appeared that racing had changed concerning the McLaren SP statement, affirmed that it stood by Oliver's move to take care of his health, his well-being. Of course, Helio Castroneves came in to fill in for that weekend. We also talked about how we know other drivers like Marc Marquez from MotoGP, whose season has been essentially derailed with his injury, but Honda was waiting for him to recover and to come back. While there is no direct link or evidence to say his injury was a factor in being dropped, does this put drivers in motorsports, not just IndyCar, MotoGP, but NASCAR, other series, a little bit more concerned that if they get hurt, they may not get their seat again?
Well, actually, looking at this situation after what happened with Oliver Askew, it might force some drivers to be more forthcoming with their injuries, and I hope that's something that happens moving forward because we definitely don't want a driver to be out there on the track and become a hazard to somebody else, because they didn't specify that they were injured or yeah, and I do understand that they might be afraid that if they go out they're going to lose their seat, but yeah, and then sometimes with the way this story turned out, it ended up making Arrow McLaren SP and the entire NTT IndyCar series look bad, especially since the series it's been highly touted for its safety protocols, and it left many shocked that at the time that IndyCar would miss something like this, and that they will let Oliver go out there and compete with the concussion.
Yeah, it's something where it does seem it's just a really negative view of IndyCar, McLaren SP with all this going on. With that said, is there something that IndyCar or if another series had a similar situation can do about a situation like this where you have fans being critical about a driver, a rookie driver being let go and a possible connection that was due to the injury?
I'm not really sure what IndyCar could do in this situation, but I think that IndyCar and all of the teams need to sit down with these drivers and be like, if you're injured, please just tell us. And I think the teams need to cut the drivers a little slack, especially when there might be a potential injury, because unfortunately these things just happen in racing. Yeah, yeah, although these race cars are extremely safer now than they've ever been, probably yeah, definitely the most advanced cars in terms of safety. But unfortunately, no matter how safe you make these cars, injuries are going to happen at some point. And I do feel like that when these type of situations occur, you just need to. I think what we need is a change in culture where these drivers are being told that if you ever suffer an injury or feel like you're having concussion like symptoms, please tell us immediately. Please don't feel like you need to hide it because your health is number one.
Yeah, their health is number one. And it just sort of surprised me that we're having this discussion. I know it's been well documented everything that has happened with the National Football League here in the United States with players playing with concussions, and then of course the league not doing enough for the driver's safety. Last thing any one of us will want is to see a driver go out there when they're not 100% and endanger themselves and everyone else. I know in the past there's been talk about drivers like Ricky Rudd driving with his eyes taped open, drivers going out there all busted up after an injury, still trying to get that win. While this that is something that's worth noting and cheering a driver for that they're one tough individual. Still, I believe it's not in the best interest overall as a sport to just assume that is okay, especially a concussion. We don't want to see our favorite drivers getting hurt to the point where their career ended shortly. Nobody wanted to see Dale Earnhardt stop racing so early on compared to other drivers that had driving careers 20 years going, multiple wins. And it's just something where I do agree motorsports need to have that discussion and look at changing the mentality because we want the drivers to be healthy racing and not fearing that being transparent about their health could lose them their job. Now, of course, it is a very competitive sport where winning matters, your performance matters, and we see the changes, especially when it comes to some teams. They're good at being loyal to their drivers. The drivers delivers good results, the team's going to be more loyal to them. And then we've seen some teams where the performance is not there. They make a change and they just tell the driver, hey, we're going this direction. That's the way it's going to be. With McLaren, SP handling of Hinchcliffe, Ericsson, and now Askew, is there a concern, especially for the new driver, Felix Rosenqvist, for 2021, and the current driver, Pato Award, that they really have to perform or else they could be, before you know it, on the outside?
I do feel like there's certainly going to be a lot of pressure on Felix Rosenqvist if the story about him going to McLaren is confirmed and factual. And Pato Ward, who's already been announced he's returning. I do think those two drivers will need to go out there and perform, especially when you're driving for an organization like Team Penske, Chip Ganassi Racing, and now we have McLaren in this returning to the series with Sam Smith's operation and Rick Peterson. I do think that there's always gonna be a lot of pressure for them to perform because McLaren invested a lot to run the IndyCar series with Arrow and all of their partners, and I'm sure McLaren wants to compete for wins and championships. They've been very competitive with Pato O'Ward this season. There's a few races that Pato O'Ward could have won this year, and I'm sure once he figures out how to put a complete race together, then we're going to see Pato O'Ward get in victory lane. I really do think that he's going to be one of IndyCar's featured stars. And also, like I mentioned earlier in the program, talking about James Hinchcliffe and Oliver Askew, both of those drivers left in what amid controversy, and both of them were managed by the same agencies, which is Spire. So maybe both of those situations with Hinchcliffe and Askew could actually be tied to what went on with Spire and how they handled those situations.
Yeah, definitely when it comes to McLaren being Indy cars, you have to put them up there with Penske and Reddy Osborne, Chip Ganassi. Those are the teams. They're not there just to get wins. They're there to try to get championships as well. A lot of pressure, especially Felix Rosenqvist. We know Ganassi lost results. He got a win this year early on. Had a tough break at Texas, going out, spinning out essentially while battling for the lead. Definitely going to be really interesting to see what happens next year. I know when it comes to motorsports, it's always such a competitive environment, like any sport, especially. But it's just one of those things where I think it would be beneficial for the sport as a whole to see where the culture change, where you don't have to worry about hiding your injury. You can be transparent at the end. You know your ride is still safe, but especially when you're healthy and can come back to race again.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully, we'll see a change in culture in the next several years or so because it's really sad to see where drivers have to feel like where they have to hide their injuries or they're going to potentially lose their seat. And unfortunately for Oliver Askew, after what appeared to be a promising rookie season, things are going south, and we have no idea where he's going to end up next with his IndyCar career. And sticking to the same subject of IndyCar, we got some IndyCar news corresponding with some Formula E news as well. We have 2019 20 Formula E champion Antonio Felix da Costa. He's going to be testing an IndyCar on November 2nd at Barber Motorsports Park in Alabama with Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing. Da Costa said he's a big fan of America and IndyCar racing in general, and he said it's been a huge dream of his to try out an IndyCar for the first time. And many were wondering what Da Costa was doing in Indianapolis, and now we know. DaCosta first met team owner Bobby Rahal through his connections as a BMW factory driver and kept asking for an opportunity to test an IndyCar. And as you know, Bobby Rahal has an IMSA team in GTLM with BMW, Team RLL with the BMW M8 GTE in the GTLM class. And Joe, here's my question for you. Do you think this is just a one-off, just for fun test session, or could this potentially lead to Antonio Felix Acosta actually competing in an IndyCar race someday?
I will not be surprised if someday we see Antonio Felix da Costa in the IndyCar series, whether it's a one-off race or full time, possibly 2022, or even the Indianapolis 500. We've known they talked about Rahal Letterman. They'll love to add a third car, especially with sponsorship. That's the big thing. There's a sponsorship. If they can make a deal happen, I definitely see Antonio Felix Costa being one of the candidates. But that's it. It's going to be really interesting. It'll probably be 2022. Of course, 2021, Costa, the defending Formula E champion. I think it'll be great to see what he could do there. I think a lot of folks are going to start watching Formula E because they could see his potential Formula One IndyCar drivers. And for me, I was excited to hear about Antonio Felix Acosta getting this opportunity to test with Ray Hall.
Yeah, yes, and it's actually really funny that this happened because I remember when we were having our Formula E Zone programs with Jack from Formula E Zone. We at the very end of our program, was happening during the month of August when we were having all the Indianapolis 500 stuff going on, and we were just wondering if a Formula E driver went to compete in the Indianapolis 500, which driver would that be? And I'm not really sure if we mentioned Antonio Felix da Costa potentially competing in the Indy 500 or even IndyCar someday. And I was actually really surprised to see da Costa getting this test opportunity because it seemed like that he was content with racing in Formula E for the foreseeable future. And I really had no idea that he had such a passion for American open wheel racing and a strong desire to try out an IndyCar. Maybe next year we'll see him compete in select rounds on a third car. And if he decides to move on from Formula E, maybe IndyCar could be in his future.
Yeah, IndyCar could definitely be in his future. Of course, one of the big things, Formula E, it's going to be a world championship recognized by the FIA. It's going to be very exciting to see all the potential next year. It's going to be an exciting season. One of the big things, of course, lately that's been going on in Formula One, all the talk about Alex Albon. Is he in or is he out of that Red Bull seat? It's definitely a hot seat as it's getting hotter for Alex Albon to perform. This past weekend, twice flat spotted the tires, struggling, had that incident with Daniel Kvyat, retired because of a water leak. Red Bull needs him to get a little closer to Max Verstappen in terms of performance. Dr. Marco stated that Albon is close to Max on the good days, but the team cannot afford to be standing on one leg, especially when you see Mercedes. A lot of times they're getting 1-2 finishes with Lewis Hamilton, Valtteri Bottas. Max Verstappen been there on the podium, but we see Alex Albon hit 6th. He's not consistently in 4th place. Now, Marco did mention the possibility of looking at Nico Hulkenberg or Sergio Perez as options for next year if Alex Albon is dropped. Do you see Hulkenberg and Perez as realistic options for Red Bull?
Yes, I do. Both Nico Hulkenberg and Sergio Perez are experienced veterans in Formula One, and and I do remember a time when Sergio Perez had that opportunity to compete with McLaren, but it just didn't work out. I'm sure Perez would love an opportunity to compete with a top Formula One organization once again, and yeah, Nico Hulkenberg as well. Nico Hulkenberg has been around in Formula One for a while, and he's been doing some substituting for Racing Point this year, first with Sergio Perez, and then last time around with Lance Stroll. So yeah, so Sergio Perez and Nico Hulkenberg certainly have the credentials and what Red Bull could be looking for. It'd be interesting to see if one of those two Formula One veterans get the run and if they're able to match Max Verstappen's pace. It seems like Alex Albon is certainly in a tough spot. I know we've talked about this a lot on our programs with Max Verstappen. It's been his like the hardest person to have as a teammate because Max is the gold standard at Red Bull and also Formula One as well. It if you can beat Max Verstappen in battles and in qualifying and during the race, then you're considered one excellent driver. But so far, all of Max's teammates have been unable to match him, and it looks like that unless something changes within the next little while or so, his Formula One career could certainly be in doubt, especially if they're not going to bring him back. Well, demote him to the AlphaTauri program, but it looks like that Danny Kvyat might be out, and they might be looking at Formula Two Honda Junior driver Yuki Tsunoda.
Yeah, with Sergio Perez and especially Nico Hulkenberg, this last race weekend, 20th starting place, climbed his way to 8th place and that Racing Point. What an effort. Really proved capable of getting a good vehicle and racing towards the front. Both of those drivers, Sergio Perez and Nico Hulkenberg, will be great I think, in the Red Bull. The big thing, of course, you got Max Verstappen there. The car essentially is all around him. I think the two of them could be really capable of running up there. It has to be a concern, though, if you have either one of those drivers and they still can't compete up there with Max, then I think there's going to be a lot of question, a lot of doubt of the Red Bull program and how good of a program it is, and especially if it's two around Max Verstappen. Now, if Albon gets dropped by Red Bull, do you see him going back to AlphaTauri, or do you think he should consider other options? And do you think he might even be regretting pulling out of a Nissan Formula E seat to pursue his Formula One career?
Well, actually, I'd be a little surprised if Red Bull actually sent him back to AlphaTauri, because it seems like they're really interested in bringing up Yuki Tsunoda from Formula Two. I know Honda's been very high on him, and with Honda leaving the sport at the end of 2021 season, yeah, Red Bull said that that it didn't change how they felt about Yuki Tsunoda. Still ranked him very high on their list. So yeah. So when looking at those situations, and if they decide to give up on him, I don't really know where Alex Albon is going to go from here. I don't know if another seat's going to be available on the grid, but I'm sure he's hoping that Red Bull's going to be very grateful and give him more time to develop in that Red Bull car, and we know the car is more suited to Max's driving ability. So and we saw Pierre Gasly, in the same situation as Alex Albon. Everybody thought Pierre Gasly, was not a great Formula One driver, and he didn't deserve the seat. But then gets demoted to AlphaTauri and goes out there and wins the Italian Grand Prix this season, which was one of the most shocking upsets that we've seen in Formula One in a long time. And maybe if Red Bull decides not to promote Yuki Tsunoda to AlphaTauri, then maybe Danny Kvyat goes out, can put Alex Albon back to AlphaTauri and let him develop, and he can have a Pierre Gasly type resurgence. And actually, you did bring up a good point mentioning his Nissan Formula E seat, because when he graduated from Formula Two, he was actually going to race for Nissan in Formula E, and and when the opportunity to go race in Formula One came up, he ended up backing out of his Nissan deal, and Oliver Rowland took his place alongside Sebastian Buemi over in Formula E. So actually, I don't think that he should regret pulling out, because there's not a lot of opportunities to take one of those 20 spots on the Formula One grid. And if you have an opportunity to go to Formula One, I feel like any young driver should take the opportunity to do that, because being able to be a Formula One driver for most drivers who are on the Formula One ladders, it's really hard to make it.
It is very hard to make a Formula One. Only 20 seats. And of course, a lot of times, right now, some of the best are going to be having a seat like Lewis Hamilton, Sebastian Vettel. Then, of course, there are the drivers that through backing of sponsors, they have a seat. So, opportunity in Formula One, it's always very lucrative. You can't fault anybody for taking the opportunity, especially with a midfield team. There's always a possibility, the midfield team could have one race that plays out into their hand and take a win, like we saw AlphaTauri at Monza this year. Now, definitely, we're going to be following a lot about Formula One. We do have a question from the chat room from one of our viewers, and definitely encourage everyone in the chat room. Feel free to ask questions. This was in regards to IndyCars. Earlier, we were talking about Oliver Askew. One of the questions: what will happen with Helio, particularly Helio Castroneves, next year? I don't believe we have heard anything, any predictions on where you think Helio is going to end up next year.
I have no idea where Helio Castroneves is going to end up. When McLaren asked him to replace Oliver Askew at the Harvest Grand Prix doubleheader at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway road course, a lot of people thought this might be an audition for 2021 with Helio Castroneves. But with the reports out now about Felix Rosenqvist taking that seat, maybe we don't know what's going to happen. Maybe McLaren will expand to a 3-car operation that includes Helio Castroneves next season. But Helio did say at the latest IMSA round that he hopes to have some news coming out soon about what he's going to do next year. Will he find another program to compete racing in IMSA, or will he make a full-time return to the NTT IndyCar Series? We're just going to have to wait and see.
It is a wait and see, and you do bring up a good point about the potential of McLaren expanding to a 3rd-car team. There's even been rumors that maybe a Sergio Perez could be part of a 3rd-car team, because McLaren has said they'll be interested in having him join the IndyCar team. So definitely that's another driver silly season will be following throughout. And we encourage everyone, especially in the chat room, like, comment, and share our videos. Definitely want to get in touch with you. Now it's time for some quick takes.
Yes, some quick takes. Formula One and Super GT champion Jensen Button is set to make his GT3 debut in the season finale of the British GT Championship at Silverstone. He will drive for the team that he co-owns, Jensen Team Rocket, RJN, and a McLaren 720S GT3, and he's going to be co-driving in a 3-hour endurance race at Silverstone with Chris Buncombe.
Formula E saw Nissan Formula E Dams team announce an unchanged driver lineup for next year. Sebastian Vettel and Oliver Rowland will return as their full-time drivers for next season. The test and reserve drivers will remain the same heading into 2021, with Jan Mattenborough and Mitsuri Takabashi continuing their roles.
F2 driver Yuki Tsunoda, we mentioned him a lot earlier in the program, will take another step towards his goals of becoming the next Japanese Formula One driver. Scuderia AlphaTauri announced that Tsunoda will test its Formula One car at Imola next month and participate in the annual end-of-the-year rookie test at Abu Dhabi. Tsunoda currently sits in the top 5 in the F2 driver standings, so it looks like he's certainly going to have all of the requirements to get a super license so he can be eligible to race in Formula One. And AlphaTauri team principal France Tost told Motorsport.com that Honda's withdrawal from F1 doesn't impact its relationship with Tsunoda. And as we know, Honda recently announced that they would leave Formula One again at the end of the 2021 season, and Honda's continuing to support Tsunoda as one of its young junior drivers.
Formula 2 is going to see a new 17-year-old Theo Pourchaire make his Formula 2 debut next month in Bahrain with HWA race laps alongside teammate Artem Markelov. He finished second in the Formula 3 championship. Pourchaire will secure the seat vacated by Gianno Alesi and Jake Hughes, who got an opportunity to go get some Formula 2 seat time. Journalist Philip Horton made an interesting point that Pourchaire was only 10 years old when his teammate Markelov made his Formula 2 debut. At the time, it was Grand Prix 2 debut. Markelov is 26 years old.
While the Indy Lights grid has been on hiatus in 2020, there should be a ton of talent on the grid next season. 2 champions will be joining 2019 Indy Pro 2000 champion Kyle Kirkwood on the 2021 Indy Lights grid. Linus Lundqvist clinched the 2020 Formula Regional Americas title, securing a full-time Indy Lights seat in 2021. And the guy with one of the coolest names in motorsports, Stingray Robb, wrapped up the 2020 Indy Pro 2000 championship to claim his spot on the Indy Lights grid next season.
With IMSA, Kyle Kirkwood will make his IMSA WeatherTech sports car debut this weekend at Montreal Petit Le Mans. He will join the number 12 AIM Vassar Sullivan Lexus GTD team, sharing the car with Townsend Bell and Franco Montecelli for the 10-hour endurance race.
Joe Gibbs Racing announced that Brandon Jones will return to his Xfinity program next year. Jones is a 4-time winner in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. 2021 will be his 4th consecutive season at Joe Gibbs Racing and 6th full Xfinity season.
A lot of news. Definitely, we thank everyone for joining us today. Please like, subscribe, and join our Patreon page. With Patreon, definitely do everything we can to ensure that your support is expanding the Grid Network. We got 1 Patreon so far. Of course, we just started this not too long ago, so we're very appreciative of calling our first Patreon. Be sure to visit the link. We're transparent with where your money is being invested to help with the Grid grow, especially for 2021. We are super excited for the potential that we have. Tomorrow, Grid Girls, noon Eastern, 12:30 Eastern. We're going to be covering about all the women racing this past weekend, including the 8 hours of Monza. Saturday, Grid Live pre-race and big special. We're going to be covering the Bathurst 1000 race, the final race for the Australian Supercar season, and Scott McLaughlin's path to a Grid Ranking World Championship. 3 drivers currently have a shot at that: Scott McLaughlin, Lewis Hamilton, and Kevin Harvick. Follow us on all our social media, including Discord. Search Grid Network. You can chat with myself, Kobe, and many other race fans. For Kobe at the Podium Finish, I'm Joe San Diego. Thank you for watching and have a good night.